something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop.
Hi there, and welcome to Occupy TV. I'm David Sierra-Lupe, and with me today is David Barsamian of Alternative Radio, and we're going to talk about a variety of things, starting with politics and moving on into other more pressing issues. Welcome to Occupy TV, David.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here.
All right, I'm glad to have you. Very glad to have you. We pulled David out of the LCC Peace Conference today to come sit at our studio and have a chance to talk about what's going on in the world today. Initially, we thought we'd talk a little bit about politics. We're talking about, I don't know, just before we started, I'd said that politics is almost the root of all the problems that we've got in our society today, and you didn't really get a chance to respond to that. That's when Joe told us to stop talking. So, I don't know, what do you think?
Well, the political class that rules America, that is to say the Republicans and the Democrats, are basically two factions of the same ideology. They're both pro-business, pro-corporate on the home front, and they're almost identical with no degrees of separation in terms of their foreign policy. Perhaps one is more ferocious than the other, is more imperialist than the other, but is totally dedicated, both the parties are totally dedicated to American hegemony. They believe in poppycock such as American exceptionalism, and that the United States has a unique role in the world to lead the world and to deliver democracy to countries that may not have it, whether that's out of a B-52 or a B-2 or a bazooka. We have a militarized foreign policy that's exemplified by over 725 bases around the world.
Now, you'd said that it's exemplified by a belief in American exceptionalism, and I don't know, maybe I'm too cynical, but do they really believe in American exceptionalism, or do they just believe in the necessity of American exceptionalism to explain the actions that this country takes?
Well, I think, questions about, did Johnson really want to go to war in Vietnam, or was he pushed into it, are not terribly illuminating, but I think we have to go by the evidence and what happened. And in fact, that's what happened. American political leaders constantly talk about the U.S. role in the world. The U.S. is a unique country in the history of the world, that it has a singular mission. Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, she said it best, when she was asked about this American exceptionalism, she said without blinking an eye or any sense of irony or shame that America is exceptional because it can see farther into the future. I'm saying, wow, that sounds like a UFO has landed, and or has taken the form.
The Mayans reported in.
Something like that. Yeah, so it's a cover for intervention, which is what foreign policy is mostly about. Economic intervention, military intervention, subversion, coups d'etats. I mean, the history, the foreign policy of the United States since 1945, since the U.S. emerged as a supreme global power, has been one of almost constant warfare, or the threat of war, or the rumors of war. There's hardly a period when the U.S. is not actively engaged in some military activity. There's this a lot of hype now about Iran and what a great danger Iran presents to the world. Well, Iran has lots of internal problems. Obviously, it's a clerical, theocratic regime which is totally unacceptable. But nevertheless, it has not invaded another country since 1739. That's like 250, 60 years ago. You could hardly go to 26 or 27 days of U.S. history when there's not some kind of military activity or threat of military activity or even economic warfare. I mean, what do you call the boycott of Cuba? 50 years of a boycott that has hurt the Cuban people, not the regime in power there.
And
it's a form of warfare.
Has it helped us?
It's helped the Miami Cuban community, which is largely responsible for this absolutely asinine foreign policy. I mean, here's an island state 90 miles off the coast of Florida that wants to have relations with the United States.
Would love to.
But is deemed to be some kind of threat to what is called euphemistically the U.S. national interest.
Uh-huh. And the strength of the Miami Cubans, isn't that, I mean, that shouldn't exist in a real populist economic system, I would assume. I mean, isn't that because of the Electoral College that that little pockets of political power can exist like that? I mean,
well, the U.S. has very internally has groups that exercise an enormous amount of political clout. For example, the National Rifle Association.
Yeah.
For example, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the principal pro-Israel organization based in Washington, the Miami Cuban community. So there are within the system pockets of internal power that can leverage the political system for outcomes that are desirable and profitable and useful to them, not necessarily to the population as a whole, but for their own immediate economic and political interests. In the case of Cuba, it's not economic interest, it's obviously political and emotional.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, they're scorned, I guess, is the source of the vehemence of their political power, I guess. But so that isn't. But you're not actually agreeing that it's due to the Electoral College. The Electoral College makes certain small regional groups have outsized power.
I don't think that's the overwhelming consideration in this case. Although Florida does exercise a big, space in the Electoral College. We saw that in the year 2000, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, when it seems like all the veils came off of just how corrupt our political system was.
Yeah, it's right there from the very beginning, in this book with Noam Chomsky, How the World Works. He quotes James Madison, one of the founding fathers. So whenever you say founding father, you've got to speak in hushed tones because these are like, historic, men of just biblical proportions, And so James Madison is one of those characters. And he said straight out, the primary goal of government is to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. The minority of the opulent. I think he's saying here the 1% versus the 99%. Of course, he didn't have that vocabulary then to articulate that. So to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. And then like John Jay went one step further. He was the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. He said, quoting, "The people who own the country ought to govern it." Well, there you have it. That's the political system. The corporations rule, money dominates the political system. The politicians are at the beck and call of the corporations, and they're completely subordinated to their interests because we have the best system money can buy.
Right. So where we find ourselves is really where we were targeted to be.
If you take the statements and the intentions of the founding fathers, which Michael Parenti, a great radical political voice in this country, calls them the founding finaglers, which I think is closer to what they should be called, then you see that in fact there has been a constant pattern in U.S. politics since those early days of the founding of the Republic.
And you were just also saying before we came on that the founding fathers didn't want a Bill of Rights.
Well, they were, they had to be pulled screaming and yelling to get those 10 rights because it was because of popular pressure that freedom of speech had to be guaranteed, freedom of the press, and all these things that are now being so eroded under the change you can believe in, Hope administration of Barack Obama. There has not been a period in U.S. history, comparable, I would say, to the last decade, where basic fundamental rights have been so eroded and so corrupted. I mean, just go to any airport and you can experience it yourself. But we live in a United States of surveillance, USS state. kind of where everything is being monitored, cell phones are being tracked, emails are being read, forget about regular mail, phones are being tapped. There's an enormous amount of state security now, all in the name of security, all in the name of protecting our freedom. So here you have this paradoxical situation. Freedoms are being eroded, corrupted, eliminated, diminished, all in the name of protecting them.
Well, that's a temporary thing, because we're giving up all those freedoms because in another 5 to 10 years we're going to have a lot more freedoms. Isn't it kind of like it's like a pyramid scheme? I think, isn't it?
Well, I'm not quite so sure that that's their intent. The history demonstrates that when freedoms are diminished, curtailed, restrained, eliminated, they don't come back. Yeah. They go down the memory hole in Orwell's 1984.
Yeah.
So this is a very, dangerous period. And you see how the war on terror is projected to go on forever because why are there terrorists? Let me use that word in the colloquial sense that is used in the corporate media. Why are people doing nasty things to the United States of America? Might the United States of America, that is to say its armed forces, be doing nasty things to people in other countries? Gee, I don't know. Let's look at that a little bit. Do we see, for example, Bangladeshi military bases in Canada and Mexico? Do we see Bangladeshi naval armadas on both our east and west coasts and the Gulf of Mexico? Do we see?
No, they're Al-Qaeda military armadas.
Yeah. Are there Bangladeshi drones over the United States and low-flying helicopter, gunships? But do we see that? Is the U.S. doing that in other countries? So you have to see that it's in fact the foreign policy of the United States is creating more and more enemies. It's inventing them. And it invented the Mujahideen, who Ronald Reagan compared to freedom fighters in
Afghanistan, it also create the
who evolved into the Taliban, who then, offshoots of that could be described as Al-Qaeda, but these things are happening as a direct result of United States foreign policy. There is no discussion about that anywhere. That cannot be even broached. As soon as you talk about U.S. foreign policy and violence and terrorism in the same breath, you are anti-American. You're a traitor to this country. You're a subversive. You are supporting terrorism. You are supporting what Al-Qaeda stands for. Those are the charges that are immediately leveled against anyone who even brings up these issues. So someone like Noam Chomsky, who outside the United States is regarded as one of the foremost dissidents, not just of this period, but in intellectual history, he's regarded, with great respect and admiration. But inside the country, he's vilified. He's a target of jokes, of slander, and that's true of other intellectuals. I mentioned Michael Parenti, Howard Zinn when he was alive. Other activists are immediately pigeonholed into a narrow corner of being anti-American. When we're just bringing up the issues of why are these things happening? Are they happening in a vacuum? Are all of a sudden, people born and the first thing they think of, their first waking thought is, I want to kill Americans. I want to do violence to Americans. What garden do those seeds take root in? That needs to be examined, and of course that doesn't come, it's totally under the media radar, which is so subservient and subordinate to corporate influence, because they are corporations themselves.
Definitely.
And the interests and desires of the state managers.
So what causes them to come out, though? You're saying that they're not coming out. These terrorists are not born in a vacuum. That we're causing them to become into existence.
I didn't mean that entirely, but there is a huge influence of U.S. foreign policy in intervening in various countries in the world. Curiously, countries which have a particular product that U.S. corporations are interested in. I'll leave it to your imagination what that could be. It could be dates, it could be watermelons. Some people say it's cauliflower, other people say it's broccoli. And then there's a few that say, you know, it might be oil. It might
Olive
be
oil?
natural. It might be natural gas that is driving U.S. Foreign policy in Libya, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, you know, in all of these countries that have this particular product. It's been obsessional since 1945. In fact, there's a State Department document, which Chomsky quotes also in How the World Works, which describes the oil resources in the Arab Middle East and Iran, which is not an Arab country, as the greatest source of strategic power in the history of the world, and a huge treasure of wealth, and that the U.S. must get it.
Which we did.
Yeah, absolutely. On February 12th, 1945, just 2 months before Franklin D. Roosevelt died, he met with Ibn Saud, the emir, the king of Saudi Arabia, on a destroyer in the Suez Canal, the USS Quincy. And that's where the Faustian bargain was struck between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Arguably one of the most feudalistic, homophobic, sectarian, misogynist regimes on the face of the earth, a close ally of the US. What was the deal? Our oil companies, not the British, not the French, not the old European imperial powers, our oil companies will have access to your oil. And in return for that, we guarantee the security of your state.
Right.
So the U.S. has been backing one of the most extremist regimes anywhere on the face of the earth. I mean, I give this example, and I've been to Iran. I was there a couple of years ago. I was writing a book called Targeting Iran. If a Saudi woman, you know, woke up in the morning and found herself in Iran, now, you know all the problems Iran has internally, she would think she was in heaven. Because the opportunities for women in Iran are much, much greater than they are in Saudi Arabia.
So they can drive their own cars, they can...
Absolutely. They can own property.
Yeah, they can be seen in public with somebody not their brother or their father. Amazing, amazing.
So that alliance has been central in the formulation of U.S. foreign policy. Now, 3 years after Roosevelt signed that document with Ibn Saud, Israel is created. So now you have another factor, another strategic interest that really flowers after the 1967 war. Because the U.S. saw, the Pentagon in particular saw, that this was a strategic asset. Here was a state that had a very powerful military that could be what Nixon's defense secretary called the local cop on the beat, to keep order in the region. Now, police headquarters remains in Washington. If things get really out of control, like the first Gulf War or the second Gulf War,
or the upcoming
potential attacks on Iran, then the big brother will step in. But if there are local problems, Israel at the time, Iran and Turkey, and to some degree Pakistan, all four non-Arab states, they were the local cops on the beat, making sure that U.S. had complete access, U.S. corporations had access to the oil wealth of the Middle East. A stupendous source of strategic power is the exact quote in that State Department document.
So should Saudi Arabia be at all concerned about us moving into Iraq? Or is that kind of a leverage against Saudi Arabia?
Well, the U.S. already moved into Iraq. It invaded and occupied it for 9 years.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. I mean, are we playing that piece on the chessboard against Saudi Arabia, or is it just purely for the oil in Iraq?
Well, the United States suffered a major defeat in Iraq. It's not discussed anywhere, but it was demanding a whole host of things from the Iraqi government of Nouri al-Maliki. Didn't get any of them. It has no bases in Iraq. All the bases have been evacuated. It was going to be guaranteed that U.S. corporations would have the pick of the best oil fields. That didn't happen. So strategically speaking, the imperialists did not even achieve their imperial goals in Iraq. It's a huge defeat for U.S. power.
They achieved the one goal. I mean, there's a lot more billionaires today as a result of the Iraq War, you'd have to assume, than there were beforehand. I mean, you know, at least
war profiteering goes hand in hand. Excessive profiteering is part and parcel of war.
Yeah.
So whenever there is a war situation, the possibilities of making tons of money increase exponentially. So Iraq was no exception for that.
Right.
From that, Halliburton, KBR, Blackwater, all of them made money, incredible amounts of money. I mean, billions of dollars disappeared. Mm-hmm. Billions of dollars went missing in Iraq. Pallets of money. There's so much money. I mean, they couldn't count it. They would wait. They'd put it on a scale. Oh, this weighs 20 kilos. Oh, that means it's $4 million in cash. You know, bundles of $100 bills.
Yeah.
So the U.S. also with Saudi Arabia, don't forget, were very much responsible, using Pakistan in the 1980s to create the Afghan Mujahideen. You know, funding their training, arming them, bringing in some of the most fanatic Islamists from all over the Muslim world, from Morocco, from Syria, from Saudi Arabia, from Yemen, to go fight in the great jihad against, you know, the godless, atheist Soviet Union.
Right.
And the Saudis were bankrolling that. The Americans were providing the weaponry, and Pakistan was providing the logistics, because they were providing the seminaries where the jihadis would come, get trained, and then go into fight. Now, what happened in 1989 after the Soviet Union withdraws from Afghanistan? You have here now a cadre of people who are highly trained in what? Not accounting, not in architecture or engineering, but in explosives, in weaponry and military tactics. So a highly trained and skilled force then becomes the Taliban.
Right, okay.
And you know, Saudi Arabia gets, I mean, a huge amount of slack here. 15 of the 19 hijackers on September 11th were Saudis. They weren't from, you know, Pakistan or Afghanistan or Iran, nevertheless, or Iraq. Nevertheless, you know, Pakistan is routinely bombed. Afghanistan is invaded. Iraq is invaded. Iran is threatened with war. How come there was no retribution when nothing was demanded of Saudi Arabia? Could it be, again, that whole influence of oil? Gee, I don't know. That sounds like a conspiracy theory.
It does. But it was still a win for the private financial interests. I mean, it wasn't a win for our domestic policies. So it all keeps coming back into the money. It keeps coming back into the corporate structure. We didn't get the oil reserves, but we still got, you know, people still lined their pockets. And
private corporations made a lot of money.
Yeah.
The disaster inflicted on the Iraqi people is incalculable.
It is.
The United States, in my view, should not only apologize to Iraq, they should be paying, number
reparations.
one, war reparations for the damage done to that country. Hundreds of thousands of killed, several million wounded, internal refugees in the millions, external refugees in the millions. I didn't go to Iraq during the war, but I went to Syria and Lebanon and Turkey, and there were a lot of Iraqi refugees, you know, driven from their homes in Iraq because of the violence and the threat of violence. Who's responsible for all that?
Unfortunately,
and the people who are responsible, Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Fife, Alberto Gonzalez, Ashcroft, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, where are they now? Are they in jail? Are they doing time? You know, they're writing their memoirs. They're getting invited by the University of Oregon to speak and get hundreds of thousands of dollars in speakers' fees. They come to Boulder to the University of Colorado and are treated as honored guests, as, you know, great wise people that we have to learn from. They write their memoirs. They get hundreds of thousands of dollars in advances that, you know, for books they don't even write. They have they pay someone off to actually write the book. And, you know, that's an absolute scandal that these major war criminals have been given, they've gone scot-free. And the Iraqi people have paid the price for their criminal activity. And the American people pay the price in immorality, because we are in a culture that enables that. We saw it in the 1960s when a whole host of war criminals got off in the exact same way. Dean Rusk, William Westmoreland, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Hubert Humphrey, all of them were responsible for the destruction in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Was there any jail time served? None whatsoever.
Well, they still benefited the most important people. I mean, just as these groups are still benefiting the most important people, they're still benefiting the owners of the nation, for whom all of the laws and enforcement are are aimed. The corporations still benefited. So of course they're not going to go to jail. And Condoleezza Rice is being touted as a potential VP candidate. So I mean, it's not shocking they're not in jail, because they were never doing it for America.
Well, it speaks volumes to the corruption of the culture in this country, where if you or I go down to a gas station and do what is called gas and dash, like fill up the tank and then take off, we're going to be apprehended. First of all, there's surveillance cameras there.
That's right.
So they've got your license plate, a description, a picture of the car, and probably a picture of you. It's very likely you're going to go to jail. If you go to a restaurant and walk out without paying, you're going to go to jail. If you go to order a pizza and then don't pay for it, you're going to go to jail. So what is that message saying to kids in this country about the political culture? It's saying that if you commit a big crime in the suites, in the penthouse level, nothing happens to you. In fact, you'll be rewarded.
Yes.
You'll be praised and applauded. But if you do something in the streets, like don't pay for a pizza, then you're going to jail.
Right.
I think it has an effect on people, and they see the hypocrisy of the system. They see the double standards, and that's one of the reasons Occupy is such a salutary movement, because it points out these contradictions and paradoxes and the utter hypocrisy of the whole system. I mean, it's not even talking out of both sides of your mouth. It's like talking out of all sides of your mouth at all the time.
And at great volume.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean,
and to
drown out. Exactly.
To drown out any dissident voices.
Yeah, because the dissident voices don't have any money behind them anyway, so it makes them easier to drown out.
It's not only that. It's like when you have, like the people I feature on, alternative radio, like Gar Alperovitz or Naomi Klein, or I mentioned Chomsky and some other voices. You hear, let's say, their opinion once, and they say something that seems to be off the wall, like the United States contributes to global terrorism. And you say, what?
No, we're fighting it.
Well, that doesn't, but then you don't hear it again. Plus, when in these rare opportunities that we have, when we're allowed on the corporate media, I've been on CNN once, I think, and I've never been on other programs. You're given like 8 or 12 seconds to say something that is startling to most people. And so if you don't have the space to give details, to give examples, it sounds like you're from Mars.
Right.
Like, where did this person, what UFO did he land on?
Right, yeah. You're not supported. Your message isn't supported. Your message isn't making the money for the people who are building the studios and the media.
Well, there's a drumbeat of propaganda, which benefits the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower so eloquently spoke about in his farewell address on January 17, 1961, as he was leaving the White House. Unfortunately, while he was president, he did very little to limit the growth of that military-industrial complex. And in fact, he destroyed democracy in Iran. He destroyed democracy in Guatemala. He invaded Lebanon. I mean, there was a whole host of things that went on. He threatened Indonesia. There was subversion against Sukarno, because anyone who was outside the U.S. orbit was seen as a potential ally of Moscow. So everything. This was the period of the Cold War. People like Nehru and Tito and Nasser in Egypt was subverted time and time again because of the threat of independent nationalism, something that the U.S. never desired, even though they paid lip service to independence, they wanted these newly independent countries coming out of World War II, India, Egypt, Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, all of them, to be subordinated to the Washington power structure.
But they didn't want democracies. They just wanted subordination. I mean, they didn't care what form they took. I mean, they call it a fight for democracy, but it's not. They weren't looking for democracy. They just want subordinate structures.
Perfect example of that is Egypt, where first there was a military rule under Nasser. He overthrew King Farouk, the monarchy, in 1952. Nasser dies. Then he's succeeded by another military leader, Anwar Sadat. Sadat is assassinated by fundamentalist Muslims who were against the peace treaty that he had signed with Israel, signed under U.S. coercion and duress, one might say. And then the last 31 years of Hosni Mubarak, who wound up being the longest-serving ruler of Egypt since Ramses II, the great pharaoh. Throughout this period of Mubarak's rule, he was called a moderate, and Egypt was called a stable country. Now, you have to translate these things. These are Orwellian terms. When the U.S. calls a country stable, it means that it's obeying orders from Washington.
They're making money for us.
Or they're obeying orders from Washington. And if its leader is, the leader of that country is called a moderate. So for decades, even while the worst human rights atrocities were being, going on in Egypt, the U.S. kept saying it was a moderate, country. It was stable, and Hosni Mubarak was our ally.
Right.
And we backed him to the hill, just as we backed the Shah of Iran, just as we backed Suharto and Duvalier and Somoza, all of the Saddam Hussein, until he made the mistake of attacking Kuwait. Up until then, he was a valued and trusted ally of the United States. The U.S. loved the fact that he attacked Iran in 1980, gave him billions of dollars in agricultural credits, gave him military weapons. Donald Rumsfeld, a major war criminal, was special envoy of Reagan to Iraq, where he gave Saddam Hussein the helicopter gunships that he later used in Halabja to spread chemical weapons against the Iraqi Kurdish population, a charge that was used by George W. Bush and the corporate media to justify the invasion of Iraq in March of 2003. I mean, it sounds like, wow, this is really complicated. But if you look at it, it's pretty transparent. At the same time, Orwell, who I love to quote, said sometimes the hardest things to see are right in front of your nose. And the machinations of U.S. foreign policy are so obvious and should be transparent that it takes a really disciplined intellectual class and a corporate media to ignore it.
Right, yeah. And keep people like you from only having 8 seconds to deliver a counter proposal, which, because our media is so clustered now, so concentrated, they're able to keep it under control. They're able to keep your voice out of the media.
Well, one of the reasons I started alternative radio was I was worried about media concentration. I was completely fed up with this corporate pablum, this palaver that was being delivered up. So-called news and information was more like, entertainment, celebrity-itis, Hollywood divorces, and of course sports and weather, which are the most significant parts of most newscasts. And then the serious political stuff was all skewed toward ruling class ideology and the preservation of U.S. dominance in the world. So Ben Bagdikian wrote a book in the early 1980s called The Media Monopoly. I think it came out in 1980. Okay. And he identified 50 corporations as controlling most of the media in the U.S. At that time, he said, this is not a good situation.
That was a red flag when it was 50.
Yeah. Well, this does not serve the communication needs of a democratic society. No matter what your political persuasion
it hurts everybody.
It should be, a very wide range of opinion from A to Z. So he wrote a second edition, 50 became 28, then a third edition, 23. You can see where I'm going with this. Fourth edition became 14, fifth edition became 10, sixth edition corporation became 6, and the latest book has 5 corporations, controlling the media in the country.
I am constantly amazed that more people don't talk about that. I do recall back in the late 80s, people were talking about that. I mean, briefly, when it was around 23, saying, imagine when it's going to be down to 5, we're going to be living in a dictatorship. We're going to be controlled entirely. But people aren't talking about it anymore. I don't hear, you were the first person I've heard really of substance bring it up in years, if not decades.
Well, let's not forget the important and crucial role that liberal Democrats played in this whole move toward concentrations and mergers and takeovers. It was the Telecommunications Act of 1996 which really opened the floodgates to corporate control. That was the legislation that Gore and Clinton were touting at the time would revolutionize the media, would give American, citizens of the United States this great, plethora, multiplicity of channels, I think was the term that they used. Well, they got the multiplicity of channels all right, but what's on? It's like 50, like what Bruce Springsteen said, 57 channels on and nothing's on. Now it's 570 channels and nothing's on.
Nothing's on.
Less CTV, Channel 29.
That's right. That's right.
One of the most important independent media outlets anywhere.
Very, very true. Very true. And another media outlet that I've been starting to get interested in is Occupy at the national and international level is currently making an attempt to build a media structure. I don't know, you probably aren't really hip to it much yourself yet because it isn't really getting out there, but is it possible? Is it possible at this stage, using the internet and all the other stuff that we have at our disposal, to actually create a new media structure that will actually deliver real news, real information, parallel to the existing structure? Is it possible?
Absolutely. We have examples of that. I mean, look at the reporting from Tahrir Square, where citizens became journalists. Let's say I don't have any journalism background, but I have a cell phone which has a camera. I have a handheld camera. I have a tape recorder of sorts, and we can distribute through the internet. I can send images instantly via email of photos I took of, let's say, the Egyptian police tear gassing and beating demonstrators in Tahrir Square. That can be emailed to you instantly, and you can have that and then distribute it widely to another network. So it is a revolutionary situation right now, and I think occupiers are acutely aware, particularly the young people, of the importance and centrality of the medium, of the message. The medium is the message, Marshall McLuhan said.
Right.
And so we've got to wrest it out of the control of the corporations, which I think is coming about. And that was what was so exciting about all of these revolutions throughout the Middle East, was the fact that ordinary citizens became journalists. We weren't waiting for Martha Raddatz or the horror of ABC News or the horrible Lara Logan of CBS to tell us what was going on and what the Arabs were thinking or what Islam was about. I mean, these massive reductionist generalizations that would make, Edward Said flip over in his grave multiple times. You can't talk about Islam like it is one thing, a monolith, or Arabs, or the Muslim mind. Imagine if anyone talked about the Jewish mind. That means, what are you, like some kind of Jew hater? There are millions of Jews. That means that there are millions of opinions. The same thing about the Christian mind or the West. These reductionist terms, or the East, and Islam, and reviving all of that crusader-like vocabulary. There's all those people over there, the East. They don't use toilet paper. They use water. They squat. They don't sit on toilet bowls. And they eat funny and spicy food. Right. And they write backwards. Oh, yeah. Unlike us, we write the right way, left to right. But they're so screwed up. They write from right to left.
They start on the wrong side of the paper.
I was stopped by immigration at the Denver International Airport. I had just come back from Syria. Syria, and he didn't know how to look at my Syrian visa, because he didn't know it was written right to left. He was holding it upside down, and then he challenged me. What were you doing in Syria? Don't you know they hate Americans? I said, I was there for 2 weeks. I didn't have any problems. In fact, everyone was so hospitable. Why are you saying those things? Oh, no, they hate Americans. And I said, well, that wasn't, my experience.
Yeah. So the person who's never been there has been telling you what it's like.
Well, and also they internalize all these massive generalizations.
Yeah.
They is this like collective mass, them, the Muslims. And then there's civilized people, the civilized West. That's us.
Right.
Mostly white people, mostly Christians. We're telling them these are some of the oldest civilizations on the face of the earth. Afghanistan, Iran, what is now Pakistan, formerly part of India. All of these, Egypt, have, stretched back into antiquity. They have their own cultural and political and social traditions that we are attempting to engineer. We are attempting to have a militarized foreign policy where our form of democracy is being imposed on them, whether they want it or not.
I want to circle back around to the concept of the media. Like right now, it's crowdsourcing. We're crowdsourcing the news and all that. The news coming out of Tahrir squares it's thousands of people with their iPhones pointing at the news, but we still don't have the funnel to direct it in a meaningful fashion. I mean, so we have it now. We have the access. We have the raw material. Do we have a chance to begin to meaningfully package it in a way that everybody can receive it and have the light bulb go off over their head, or is it still just going to get to you and me who are already sympathetic?
No, it's expanding beyond that. There are networks. For example, in the U.S., there's Free Speech TV based in Denver. There's Deep Dish TV in New York. There's Link TV in San Francisco. There are now mechanical wires in place. The pipelines are out there for information to be disseminated. There's the remarkable success of Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!, which started at a community radio station in New York, the Pacifica station, WBAI. It was going to be a temporary program for the election cycle in 1996, but community radio stations like the one I started at KGNU in Boulder picked it up and said, hey, we want to keep it going beyond the election. This is something we really need, a daily news program. And so it's one of the great media success stories, in my view, alternative media success stories. It's on many, many TV stations as well, PBS and NPR affiliates. So we've seen the growth of that kind of independent media, alternative radio, alternativeradio.org. It's broadcast all over Canada, all over the United States, in Eugene on KLCC Tuesday evenings at 6:30, in South Africa, in Australia. So we're getting the word out, and digital technology also serves our purposes in that it becomes much easier and cleaner, the audio and the visual, when it's digitized rather than the old analog.
Oh, yeah.
And I go back, to the 70s and 80s. You're too young to remember things called cassettes.
Oh.
I used to make, scores of cassettes and then send them to the Canadian stations because there was no way to, transport sound. There was no internet yet. There was no satellite system. So I had made the cassettes.
Bank of
the decks, and then go to the post office, fill out a customs form, send it, get there a week later, 2 weeks later. I mean, it's like, if I think about it now, it was like the horse and buggy era of distribution. Yeah. And now it's just instant. This audio file can be sent in a matter of seconds, and it has the virtue of being broadcast quality because there is no deterioration of the sound. And as you know, with analog, every time you copy it, the sound value dropped.
Yeah.
So this is a great part of digital technology.
Yeah, so we can reproduce, we can do that. We have a hope. We have the wires in place. Are we actually at a point now where we can have a hope that this groundswell of Occupy, of people responding to the bailout and all that, do we have a hope that we actually can make something happen? We can gather the information, we can funnel it to the people who don't already agree with us, and begin to change hearts and minds, or are we just going to keep talking to ourselves? Are we going to all of us are going to attend the same rallies and all that? Is there a hope yet? Is Occupy actually doing something?
Well, without hope, why do we wake up in the morning? Why are we doing this program? Why am I, breaking my chops and traveling all over the country and giving talks and producing a weekly national broadcast? Obviously, I believe there is hope. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this kind of work.
And I do too. It's a rhetorical question, and to that extent.
But Occupy has broken through a lot of barriers. It has injected into the public discourse, for the first time in the United States, a discussion about capitalism and all of its iniquities and all of its limitations. It's talking about not just income inequality, but wealth inequality, a tax code that is totally rigged in favor of the rich, who can pay for high-powered accountants and lawyers to work the system, to game the tax code, to figure out where the breaks are, where the loopholes are. There's this one corporation, a U.S. corporation, spent $26,000 to open up a P.O. box in the Bahamas. Now, why would it do that? Well, $26,000 is not a big investment, but it saved them $40 million in U.S. taxes. By having their corporate headquarters, and it was the Rand Corporation, say it was based in the Bahamas. It's now called Ingersoll Rand. And David K. Johnson, a very good former New York Times journalist, wrote a book about this called Perfectly Legal. Under the existing tax code, which is a major weapon of class warfare in the United States, class warfare against the middle and the poor, in favor of the rich is what I mean by that. He's documented all of these instances where corporations have even outsourced jobs, close factories, and then take that as a tax write-off, a tax deduction.
And then somehow they're hoping in the near future to be able to bring that stuff back in under favorable tax conditions too. Repatriate their profits that they got the tax break on when they offshored all the work.
It's the best system money can buy.
Yeah.
For those who say capitalism is not working, I slightly demur from that. It is working for the 1%.
Oh, yeah.
It has historically worked for the 1%. They are maximizing profits. They're making money hand over fist. So it's a good system for them. The problem is the 99% are left behind.
Yeah.
Since the 1970s, and certainly since the 80s, wages have gone flat. Absolutely stagnant. No growth in wages. Productivity, incidentally, has gone up.
Right.
Why is that? People are working longer and longer hours, working 2 jobs, working overtime. So productivity has gone up, but income has not. And people have seen their wealth, their net value decline. Pensions have been eliminated. Healthcare is unavailable unless you want to go through a private system. Days off, sick leave, those kinds of things which good union jobs provided for its members now are largely memories. If you talk to a teenager today and you talk about pensions, and they don't know what you're talking about. They're happy to be, to be at the checkout counter at Safeway, or working as a greeter at Walmart, or, those are the kind of jobs now that are being offered by American capitalism.
Yeah. Well, those are the kind of jobs. I'm nearly 50 myself, and I've never even dreamed of a pension, and only once had a job that offered me health care, and I don't even think that one offered me days off. So, that's been instituted for a while.
It has to be said, Democrats and Republicans. This is not a Republican project exclusively. It's been the one-party system that has created, that slogan, I remember when in the 90s under Clinton, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Partly true. What they didn't tell you was that the boats were all yachts. And the other part of the tide, the canoes and the rowboats that we're in, the ordinary people are in, they went right to the bottom of the ocean. And that's where they've remained in this period. And the yachts have gone higher and higher.
Do you feel like, how do you feel about the Tea Party? I mean, I feel like that's where we have a chance to cross that bridge. You know, there are people, they're responding to the government excesses. I understand that, but I think everybody right now is starting to see, yeah, this whole corporate run government of ours is rotten from the inside out. We can't count on it to fix the problems. We know the problems are there. You and I agree that the problems are there, and I have Tea Party friends who will also say, yeah, that it's rotten. This whole system is rotten.
You don't want a heroin user operating a rehab clinic. You know, you want someone who is free from addiction to run a rehab clinic, to be a model, to be someone to be emulated. So the idea that the system itself can cure itself of these ills that it has created, the bacteria and microbes that it has spread, I think is total illusion. So the answer does not lie in the political class.
I agree.
Power concedes nothing without a demand, as Frederick Douglass said. And so there has to be a massive movement, which is what certainly Occupy represents to some extent, and the Tea Party to a lesser extent. To be specific about your question about the Tea Party, I find them quite confused about just political realities. For example, I went to a Tea Party rally in Fort Collins, Colorado, just north of Boulder, where I live, and there were signs, Tea Party signs, saying, "Hands off my Social Security and Medicare."
Keep your government hands off my Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah, and then there was like the next sign next to it said, government out of our lives. We want, keep America free. Now there was something contradictory there. It didn't quite track. Who is responsible for Social Security and the Medicare program? Where did that come from? Who has organized it and sustained it? And then this thing, what they were saying about the government. So you have this, incredible contradiction. Nevertheless, there is a wellspring of dissidence there and discontent.
Yes.
But I'm disturbed also, not just by these, the inability to track these contradictions, but there's also a strong nativist and racist tone to some of the rhetoric. We need to get our country back because, unspoken, because all those dark people are coming here, are here, they're stealing American jobs. What American jobs are they stealing, by the way? Cleaning toilet bowls in motels? Those are jobs that most white Americans refuse to do. In Boulder, where I live, there would literally be no landscaping, there would be no construction, there would be no restaurant work, there would be no hotel work without immigrants who are doing these jobs. There was a great movie made about this, a satirical movie about Los Angeles, A Day Without Mexicans. And the whole city becomes a ghost town. Southern California shuts down. That's what it would be without these foreigners.
Right.
Well, in the case of Colorado and California, these are Mexicans who have come home.
That's true. That's true. We kicked them out so we could move in. Yeah, but I guess the thing I agree, and I'm amazed at the level of misspellings in Tea Party signs as opposed to Occupy signs. So there's clearly some informational gap that's going on there. But what I'm comforted by is the fact that there is a shared sense of that we can't rely on the government. We can't rely on the normal powers to solve this problem anymore. Unfortunately, the Tea Party is bought out, and now they're just a wing of the Republican Party. But there were people initially who felt that something had to change, and that's where I find comfort. Is that we have to, in order to be 99%, you gotta have a wide scope, and so I hope that there's a way to reach across that gap, and we're going to be bringing along racists, and we're going to be bringing along people who don't really take the whole picture into account. But we'll be bringing them along. We'll be creating a populist movement, and so that's why I was asking. Do you feel like we actually do have ready partners there? Do we feel like that is a group of people we can count on as we move to correct this problem, because we know now that we have to correct it. We can't rely on...
Power conceives nothing without a demand. It's not
Exactly.
going to come from the top. It's got to come from the bottom. That's how social change has always happened in the United States. Every significant gain that the U.S. people have achieved in their history has been because of popular movements, because of agitation from below. So that's why we have some of the rights that we have today, because of that.
That's why we have the Bill of Rights, like we talked about initially.
But education is key to agitation. Agitation without education is kind of in a vacuum, because there isn't the information to really inform that agitation intellectually. Now, I'm not talking that people need to be, highbrow intellectuals.
They need to learn how to spell. It's not that.
It's awfully boring. But they, need to understand the nature of the U.S. political economy, let's just say capitalism, and the political system that enables that political economy to operate. What is it about? How does it work? Who does it benefit? Very simple question. Again, you don't have to go to Harvard or Yale or Cal or Stanford and get a degree in political science. Just ask the question, who benefits? Cui bono? And that will explain a lot. Who benefits from the system?
And can we deliver that message across this divide, across this political divide? Can we deliver that message and bring compatriots back to us from across that divide?
Of course, everything is possible, but I think a lot has to do with the voice and the tenor in which conversations take place.
Right.
If I'm lecturing you, well, look, David, you're really a moron, and I'm a genius, and that's my basic posture. Let me explain. This is what the birds and the bees are about, and 2 and 2 is 4. If it's simplistic and pedantic, and in that kind of tone, it's going to not only put people off, it'll have the opposite effect. Who are these arrogant SOBs lecturing me? Hey, I worked all my life, I've, done my part, I've paid taxes, I fought in U.S. imperialist wars, although they wouldn't call it that.
No, they wouldn't.
And this guy's lecturing me? Get out of here. Well, where do you come from? So it has to be in a respectful tone. Look, this is what I see. Here's the information, here's the evidence, read this book or get this article and, read Chris Hedges or whoever, Seymour Hersh, see what they have to say.
Find out about the Powell memo.
And does that track with your understanding of how things are working?
Right.
So I think that respect is really important.
Okay. We've got just less than a couple minutes. Do you want to talk about your books?
Well, the Chomsky book, How the World Works, is a compilation of 4 previous interview books, and he's got this great quote in here. He says, "What the public wants is called politically unrealistic. Translated into English, that means power and privilege are opposed to it. So people want health care, people want single-payer health care, they can't get it. They want free tuition in colleges and universities, they can't get it. They want to get out of Afghanistan and curtail the military budget, they can't get it. Because it's politically impractical, which means the power structure doesn't want it." Now, the other book is called Occupy the Economy, Challenging Capitalism, a collection with Richard Wolff that I did. I think he's our best economist right now to talk about capitalism. He's a non-academic academic, I call him, because he's able to explain complex academic issues in a very straightforward manner.
He might be the person we need to help bridge this gap.
Yeah, he asked the question here in the book, why has our economic system made the rich richer for decades while everyone else just works harder to stay in place? How can we turn things around? Why did the government bail out big banks, insurance companies, and large corporations instead of helping millions of Americans who've lost their homes and lost their jobs? That's a fundamental question. And so this book is a primer, not just to the economic crisis and why it happened, but what to do about it.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we're just about out of time now. Thank you very much for joining us today. All right. And this has been Occupy TV. Tune in again next week. Thank you for coming. All right.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that?